as those we do not have those disabilities. So measuring results, measuring achievement, utilizing people, particularly who are charismatic, who are sort of well dressed in suits, as Abhijit's poster for the event says. We celebrate all that. And these are some of the tokens of how the corporates have influenced the church. Now, the thing is, excellence, achievements, results, they're all not bad things. They're not bad things in themselves. But when we begin to kind of put them on a pedestal, then it becomes a problem. I remember one very memorable conversation. Many years ago, I was in an airport with one of my ex boss, who was a Hindu and an atheist, atheist Hindu. And I was talking, I think, attended an Haggai seminar or something, and I was talking about excellence and, whatever I had been taught that time, how we have to be smart in our strategy, in our presentation, in our thinking, get results, be excellent. And my ex-boss then, who was sitting next to me, listening carefully, he said, Dr. Datta, because that's what he used to call me, is there any place, he also knew I was a Christian, is there any place in the kingdom of Jesus for those who will never be able to produce the best results, will never be excellent? Or it is all about coming first? But there are going to be people who will never come first. And will your church, will your Jesus accommodate them? Or he has place only for the achievers? And I think in many places today, in the church's vocabulary, unstated, if not stated, we celebrate the achiever, we celebrate the ones who get results, the ones who are high in corporate hierarchies or government hierarchies. They are the ones who are called to be leaders, elders, deacons, or whatever we have. And unconsciously, we send out the message that these are the things the church values. If you produce results, you're important. If you're high in your profession, you're important. If you are charismatic, you're important. If you're wealthy, you're important. And I want to close with that famous remark of where James and John wanted to be leaders, and they got their mother to plead for them that when you come in your kingdom, can we sit at your left and right? And Jesus said, well, played down the idea. He said, it's not for me to choose. And he went on to say further that the one who is the least in the kingdom will be the first. So whether we are in our churches, we are following these teachings of the Lord, or we are more guided by modern secular management principles, which are certainly useful, but which are not what the scripture teaches us, is something which we need to ponder. I think we need to keep definitely a lot of corporate principles which are good, but what is it that we put on a pedestal? That is what we need to think about. I think that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shantanu. Over to LT, sir. Yeah, over to you, sir. LT, sir.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Abhijit. Yeah. Now, I want to follow Dr. Shantanu's example But I thought I will first begin to say that whenever you come across a counterfeit, and the topic of today is about the corporates, please locate the original, because every counterfeit contains some original. Otherwise, it will not be a counterfeit. Nobody in India would try and print a 10 rupee a 15 rupee counterfeit note, because there is no 15 rupee original. So it may be a good idea, and I think Dr. Shantanu has already touched upon them. For example, the one thing that comes to me after having served in the government as well as in Christian organization, I feel one of the important areas is accountability, which is so much built into the scriptures. And that is something that we have to learn, not in terms of for every dollar spent, you should show some return worth the same dollar, but accountability to people, not just to structures, because structures are erected in order to ensure accountability. But unfortunately, structures can sometimes become our bosses, and structures stifle the life out of organizations. And this is true of the church. This is true of bureaucracy in general. I speak as a person who was with the government. And so we need to begin to see accountability is, in my view, is important, because I remember during my younger days in my state of Tamil Nadu, where I was growing up, there used to be these gentlemen who would come to us, to our homes, and they would introduce themselves as independent workers. Now, I'm scared of this word independent, because they are independent of others as well as independent of God, because our accountability to God is often through accountability to our colleagues, to our people. And any structure which ensures accountability is a welcome addition to our churches. And I think because we are working for God, we sometimes make this atrocious claim that because I'm accountable to God, I'm not accountable to any humans. But that is not the picture of the church at all in the New Testament. I will not go into that. But I just want to leave three words which I learned as a student many years ago. One of our student leaders in the Evangelical Union introduced us to these three words. He said two words are found in Hebrews 11, pilgrims and strangers. And the third word is stewards, that is in 1 Corinthians 4, verse 2. And the opposite of these three words are very interesting. The opposite of a pilgrim is a settler. The opposite of a stranger is a citizen. The opposite of a steward is an owner. Now, these opposites are not necessarily wrong, but they rob Christian discipleship of something essential. Now, for example, pilgrim is settler. Now, I was with the government. One of the first resolutions I took in the government is when the government transfers me from place A to place B, I will take it as a move from God. I will not pull wires here and there to make sure that I'll stay in the same place, which is availability. In my opinion, availability is something which becomes extremely important. The second is, of course, strangers. The opposite would be citizens, or citizens is the original, stranger is the opposite. Citizens have rights. Strangers do not have any personal rights. In fact, it's one of the unfortunate things about modern English is the word, the second person singular and plural is the same word you. Those of us who grew up in the King James Version, we distinguish between thou and ye. Now, if you read Matthew 5, the first half is in the plural, blessed are the meek and so on. But the second half is in the singular. If anyone hits thee on the right cheek, you should turn to him the other cheek, which means that I do not stand up for my right. But if I see someone hitting, say, Pastor Abhijit on a cheek, what should I do? Should I tell Abhijit, you are running this coffee chat, please turn the other cheek? Or should I give a blow to that fellow and get him off his back? So you do not stand up for your rights, and so you earn the right to stand up for others. That is essentially what democracy was meant to be, although it doesn't work that way in many countries, including the world's greatest democracies. So, but I'm saying this because of the word stranger. And steward, the opposite is the owner. You know, one of the problems about these takeover in a commercial sense. Now, I've seen this happening in hospitals. For example, hospitals and schools were established in our country more than 150 years ago by Christian missionaries of various persuasions, and they were meant to educate the people. Today, they have become business enterprises. So I think that is not what faithfulness is all about. That is about success. Now, success is not necessarily a bad word, but unfortunately, success has replaced faithfulness. That substitution to me is what is dangerous. And one other point which Dr. Shantanu touched upon, I want to tell you, which leads to these this kind of a takeover by professionals and commercial interests. Hospitals and schools, healthcare and education have now become big business propositions. We all know that. Our children, grandchildren may be in some of these institutions. But I want to tell you that we do not want the church to descend to those levels. I am deliberately using the word descend because we do not quite realize. I'm exactly repeating what Dr. Shantanu mentioned in my own words. So what we are discovering is that the corporates give you a kind of a standard which is which in a sense is important, but I would rather reduce it to the level of accountability rather than success in an absolute sense. Now, let me mention something I have learned, although I heard this from the mouth of Sir C.V. Raman. We were privileged to be the first MTech batch of IIT Madras, and our convocation speaker was Sir C.V. Raman. Now, he's a Tamil Brahmin, and he spoke without notes, although you will get the text of his talk in the IIT Madras website. He said something like this. He said, when you engineers and technologists leave this institute, you will be tempted to prostitute your knowledge for the service of human greed, particularly the manufacture of nuclear weapons, because he was part of Einstein's movement in the 50s against the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Now, that, of course, I was a Christian at that time. It went over my head. And it took many decades before I began to see its connection with the scriptures. When God told Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he was not against knowledge, which is what some Christians thought maybe 400 years ago. Because without knowledge, we cannot be stewards of God's creation, which was the first commandment God gave to Adam and Eve. But now that we are in a state of rebellion against God, every forward step in knowledge gives you a moral choice whether to use that knowledge for good or for ill. And I think humankind in general have found it difficult to use advances in knowledge only for good, which is one reason why um, corporates have a tendency, because they are saying you can use your knowledge to make more profit, make your churches self-supporting, and so you give. And churches have traditionally, have got the best real estate in a city or a town because missionaries invested the money. But one of the things about Pilgrim that is constantly moving. Now, I was telling somebody the other day, I said, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they lived in tents, but they were very rich people. But their riches were all in terms of movable property. The first immovable property that Abraham bought was to bury his wife. And so we notice that one of the things which is dragging down our Christian institutions, including churches, is real estate, the property that we have. Now, I'm not saying properties are intrinsically bad, no, but they are good servants, but bad masters. Now, when that reversal takes place, that is where we run into problems. And that is a result, in my view, because of our state of rebellion against God and all these gadgets and things that we have got um, thanks to science and technology. They have now become scope of complete attention deficiency. One of the reasons why children are no longer attentive. Recently, a pastor came to invite me to be speaker at the church camp, and he said, "Please remember that the attention span of our audience is very small." Now, how would you correct it? I mean, I am no psychologist, but I have found that, and I'm quoting Os Guinness, and I don't fully agree with what he says. He said, the move from word to image is a move towards idolatry. Now, what he's saying is, we used to be verbal people, now we have become visual people. That means we do not read, but we watch videos. And this is a very interesting thing. You can do some further analysis, but that is exactly what makes us less capable of thinking originally, and always looking for something to copy. And unfortunately, one of the habits we have inherited from the West, one particular country in the West, is that if it works in my country, it should work all over the world, in which we do not even listen to the local needs of people and adapt our methods accordingly. And of course, finally, I want to stop by mentioning that corporates try to promote identity in what you do. Like Shantanu mentioned about the huge cutouts of a pastor outside the church. I don't know which church he was referring to. I was watching an old Hindi movie. Now, my wife hates them because within the first 5 minutes, you know the end of the story. I like them because you don't have to think at all. But there was an interesting conversation, which I will never forget. Shashi Kapoor plays the father, and he's supervising the English homework of his 7-year-old son. And the question is, what is your father? And the boy is writing, my father is a man. And the father says to him, no, you should write, my father is a businessman. And the boy, of course, says businessman is a big word. I had committed a spelling mistake. But what I realized that even the English language has been infected by a wrong definition of identity. The answer to the question, what are you, should be what you do. In fact, in one church, I was introduced by the pastor's wife. LT is a speaker. I pointed to the loudspeaker and said, that is a speaker. I am a human being who can speak. But as I grow older, I may not be able to speak. That doesn't stop me from being a human being. I think basically our problem is the loss of our humanity. N.T. Wright, whose books I specialize in reading, although you have to, it's a very cultivated taste to begin to appreciate Professor N.T. Wright's books. But he keeps on saying that one of the big problems of the advent of sin is it has completely reduced our being human. Biblical anthropology, how God made us in his image. And the name of God is I am, not I do. Whereas we are actually capitalizing on the I do's and our identity. Our identity, for example, some people insist on being called as pastors or bishops or apostles or prophets. I remember when I was with the government, I was superintending engineer. And as my habit was when I was traveling outside, I was traveling in Orissa, and I joined an evening meeting where a young man was the master of ceremonies. I was supposed to be the resource person. And he introduced me as executive engineer. And after the meeting was over, somebody went and told him, you didn't introduce LT properly. He's actually superintending engineer, which is one level higher than executive engineer. And he came and apologized to me profusely. I remember saying, those who should know that I am superintending engineer already know it. In other words, I was trying to tell him that my being an SC is not my identity. That is a role that has been given to me by my government to carry out certain duties. Now, the moment we confuse these borderlines and our whole identity becomes this, then we are in serious trouble. And that is exactly what the corporates are taking advantage of. They are playing on these things. And so what I have tried to do, and of course, I'm going to try and get at least Professor Oyama, he died only 2 years ago at the age of 96. I just checked that. I must get hold of this 3 mile an hour God, because that is exactly what God is. In fact, let me close with that, with how I developed my sense of humor from the Bible. I was reading Psalm 13, 1-3. It's a Psalm of David. It is my favorite Psalm because there David says 4 times, how long, how long? And I laughed out loud. I told the Lord, Lord, if you are slow for David, how much slower you are for us 21st century people with all our AI and chat GPT and all that. You are terribly slow. And I think there is something in the being of God which we need to reflect on more to be the best antidote to the danger that corporates may be posing for us in the churches. But let us, meanwhile, learn something about accountability, which is part of discipleship. And Jesus wants us to be accountable to him through other fellow disciples. Over to you, Abhijit.
Yeah, thank you, LT sir, and thank you, Dr. Shantanu, for sharing your thoughts, your precious views. I think we'll now go into a time of Q&A.